Thank you, Jessica, and thanks to all of you who are here. Thanks for coming today, and I do hope that, whoops, I do hope that my slides work a little bit better here. There we go. I do hope that you get something out of today, and do hope that what we talked about today is valuable to you. And as Jess said, don't hesitate to type questions into the corner of your panel there so that we can be sure to address the things that are most important to you. Our topic today is Ready for Rescue, a primer on preparation. To get us started, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about who I am. I am the Vice President, as Jess said, of Pigeon Mountain Industries, and also oversee our training arm, Vertical Rescue Solutions. My personal background is in climbing and alpine rescue. I've also got a little bit of municipal rescue experience. Started in alpine rescue about 27 years ago. Which is amazing considering the fact that I'm only 29. But since then, I've also had the opportunity to work a little bit in some fire departments, and now my focus is primarily on rescue in the workplace. And the reason for that is because I've found as a municipal rescuer and a professional rescuer, paraprofessional rescuer, often we don't have the preparation or the speedy response that we need to get to a workplace in a timely sort of fashion. And so it's incredibly important that the people who are at the workplace be prepared in advance just in case something does happen. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that today with an emphasis on equipment, systems, and the overall approach. So, So why do we need to know how to do rescue? The reason we need to know how to do rescue is because of guys like this. We all work with guys like this, and sometimes the inevitable happens, and unfortunately, often when the inevitable happens, it happens to the guy who's the least prepared or the least trained. Sometimes it happens in an environment that we don't expect it to happen in, and sometimes we actually think that we're prepared, and we're really not, because panic sets in, and we don't have the immediate response that we should have. Knowing what our immediate responsibility is kind of a multifaceted thing. Your responsibility is going to vary depending on whether you're an employer, an employee, a regulatory person, whatever your position is in the organization that you work for is going to dictate what your responsibility is. We often find that people are compliance-driven when they have had a citation or a past accident. When a person is compliance-driven, that means that they're most interested in following the rules, and they have kind of a CYA mindset. They tend to be very reactive to the types of incidents that might happen, and they're most active towards preparing for the thing that has already happened in the past and not necessarily thinking forward about the thing that might happen next. It's much more important to have a safety-driven perspective on your responsibility, and that is a desire to pursue the industry best practice. What's the best plan for protecting your people or yourself in the environment that you work in, and what are the most simple, elegant solutions that you can come up with to do that? So rather than having a compliance-driven mindset and worrying so much about what the rules are and whether you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's, if you have a safety-driven mindset and you seek to involve industry best practice with simple, elegant solutions, the compliance side of the house will usually take care of itself. Your responsibility can be for clients and staff. For example, if you work in an environment such as I do, which is a training environment, we have a responsibility for the clients and the people that work here. We also have responsibility for if you work in an entertainment environment. A lot of people are doing ropes course and challenge course type things. Sometimes you work in an environment where you have engineers working for you and you're responsible for their safety. So you may have responsibility for clients or staff that work for you or around you. We also have to think about whether our responsibility is legal or whether it's just moral. There's a lot of people that we're not necessarily responsible from a legal standpoint. We're not responsible for protecting, but there is a certain moral responsibility for when we're working around people and something happens. There's a real a real desire to take care of the problem as it occurs, and ignoring a problem that might happen around you is not something that most of us will morally do. Now, the reason that that's important is because it means that even when we're not prepared, we tend to dive in to try to solve the problem. Or if someone else is not prepared, they tend to react to an incident by trying to find something to do. Usually when people are not prepared and they try to find something to do, they end up creating more problems than existed in the first place. So understanding that even if there isn't a legal responsibility, that moral responsibility actually has potential to get more people hurt. To start with, we have to consider in any environment, who is the authority having jurisdiction? Well, the authority having jurisdiction is whoever is responsible for enforcing the requirements of a job or for approving what happens on the job site. Now, the reason that that's important is because the authority having jurisdiction is going to dictate that rescue be enabled and what the rescue capabilities need to be. So whatever it is that you do as an employee, an employer, you have to do what the authority having jurisdiction says is the okay thing to do in that situation. We also have to think about OSHA. OSHA in the workplace is the ultimate authority having jurisdiction, and OSHA dictates emergency action plans. They've mandated emergency action plans in both general industry and in construction. You can see the 29 CFR 1910 38 is for general industry, and 1926, 20, 21, and 35 address emergency action plans for construction. Now, emergency action plans don't necessarily just cover rescue. They cover a lot of different kinds of things. In fact, most emergency action plans will cover natural disasters such as floods, tornadoes, hurricanes. We've heard a lot about those kinds of things in the recent past, and so covering natural disasters is one that we certainly think about, but foreseeable workplace incidents is also the kinds of things that your emergency action plan is required to contain. That means that if you work in an environment where there's potential for fire, chemical spills, confined space incidents, medical emergencies, or just about any other accident, you need to include that in your emergency action plan. Falls from height are considered a foreseeable workplace incident where people work at height. So inclusion of falls from height in your emergency action plan is an important thing to do. A written pre-plan is not necessarily required by OSHA. They don't necessarily say that your plan has to be written. However, if it's not written, it's going to be a little tough to prove that you had one if something does happen. And if it's not written, it's also very difficult to train to. So a written pre-plan is something that we at PMI and Vertical Rescue Solutions consider to be sort of foundational to any emergency action plan and to any emergency response plan. Your written pre-plan really needs to include a plan for incident notification. So when a person falls, how do they notify someone else that the fall has occurred? And this is sort of seems like a no-brainer, but a lot of people do work alone and probably shouldn't, especially when working at height. So incident notification is very important so that the emergency action plan or the response plan can be initiated. Your pre-plan should also include escape procedures for that person. So once the incident happens, how can that person respond or escape from the situation? What instructions might exist for employees who remain on site or at their post? Will people remain at their post? There may also be rescue and medical duties for employees. And then everyone needs to be accounted for after the evacuation, and this obviously applies more to tornadoes and fires and things like that. But there needs to be an accounting method to make sure that everyone has been taken care of and that everyone's accounted for. And then finally, there needs to be some post-incident follow-up. What happens after the incident? People will often have stress reactions to what happened, and then there may also be financial and moral and legal obligations that need to be taken care of on behalf of those people. Today we're going to focus on the rescue and medical duties for employees, and that's the piece of the emergency action plan that we're really going to narrow in on today. However, all the things on this list are listed in the OSHA requirements for the emergency action plan, so they are all critical. So let's go on to talk about the rescue and medical duties for employees. When it comes to falls from height, for both general industry and construction, OSHA does state that the employer shall provide for prompt rescue or assure self-rescue for employees. Now, this is important because there is a requirement for a fast response. There's a response for, I guess OSHA actually calls it a timely response. So what do we consider a timely response? Well, a person needs to be able to self-rescue or rescue themselves or be rescued by someone else before further harm can be done to their being by virtue of the fall incident. So there is a mandate for rescue from fall protection. What about non-employees? Well, this kind of comes back to that moral obligation to some degree. We have clients that we may have responsibility for. There may be subcontractors on the site that we don't necessarily have a legal responsibility for, but again, there's going to be a natural tendency to respond to them. And then coworkers from different sides of the job or different sides of the house. So if you have different divisions within your company that aren't necessarily part of your structure, you need to be sure that there's a plan for rescuing anyone who might be subjected to a fall or a fall incident. Rescue from fall protection is kind of a multifaceted thing. Your site rescue plan, first and foremost, needs to include properly trained personnel. So that means that the people inside your organization need to know what to do when an accident happens. What to do when an accident happens is going to involve, first, a simple, effective rescue system, something that doesn't take a great deal of training to maintain the capability to operate. And then it's also going to involve some pre-planning with your local municipal rescue agencies. You'd be surprised how many local municipal agencies don't know what's happening in your workplace and aren't necessarily prepared to respond to the kinds of incidents that you might have happening due to the unique environment that you work in. Your site rescue plan needs to correspond with your hazard analysis document. So first, we always have some sort of a hazard analysis document, a job hazard analysis or a job safety analysis that we do in conjunction with a work site. Your site rescue plan should first and foremost correspond with that hazard analysis document. You need to consider any fall potential and care of the patient. There should be a response plan to the incident that identifies personnel responsibilities as well as rescue methods. The equipment that you're going to use needs to be specified specifically, and other resources should be noted as well. Your training program should also be outlined in your rescue plan. So there's kind of a lot that goes into your site rescue plan. But the big things, the key things that you really need to narrow in on and that will create a rescue plan that you can live with includes notification of the incident, making contact with the subject, securing the area, initiating the on-site response, and initiating the external response. If you use those 5 bullet points as your key components towards developing your site rescue plan, your site rescue plan will take care of itself and the main categories will be taken care of. There's some other indirect considerations that are important. Management is something that we don't often think of when we think of the site rescue plan. We often think of the guys who are on site, but management needs to be notified as soon as possible. Again, sometimes that's for legal responsibilities, and often that's just to be sure that we take care of all of the other people who are on site as well. So notification of management is very important. Your in-house responders are key aspects of your site rescue plan. And then what happens elsewhere on the site? Are we going to shut down the entire site? Are people going to continue working as usual? That sounds a little easier in theory than it is in practice, because when there's an accident, usually all of the other employees on site know the person who's had the accident, and so they're going to be pretty distracted. We have to be concerned about the safety of all of the workers, not just the people that are directly involved in the incident, but others who might just be distracted or concerned by it. Notification of family members is very important in this day and age with Twitter and Facebook and all of the social media kinds of things that happen. You don't want family members to find out that an incident has occurred to their loved one by social media. So notification of family members is something that the management side of the house can take care of while the in-house responders are taking care of the incident itself. There's often psychological trauma involved that needs to be taken care of. Often the people who are working alongside those who might have been involved, as well as others who, again, like I said earlier, know them well. PR considerations is also something that can be very important. Managing the external message regarding an incident that has happened is something that should not be ignored, and is something that, again, through management, an external liaison could and should be appointed to handle these kinds of things. And often we'll get legal counsel involved very early on to try to do damage control. On a more direct level, your personnel responsibilities need to involve corporate management. And corporate management means the ongoing side of running the business while the incident is occurring. Direct incident management, which is the people who are actually managing the resources that are responding to the incident. Your rescuer roles, support roles that may be occurring alongside the direct rescue. And then a public information officer is also a very important part of the plan, just to manage that external message. And don't forget that post-incident follow-up. The post-incident management of the incident is critical to the future the future message that may occur. So in developing your rescue plan, here's the 3 things we're going to cover in detail. Developing your rescue plan, first you need to take care of your potential hazards. You need to know what the hazards are. So we're going to analyze our potential hazards. Then we're going to define self-rescue, assisted rescue, and external response protocols. And finally, we're going to focus on training and preparing our staff. So first, let's talk about analyzing our potential hazards and the detailed pieces that we need to look at there. First of all, who is exposed? There's a variety of people who may be exposed on your work site, and it doesn't necessarily mean just the workers themselves. Sometimes the people who are exposed are not necessarily the people who are doing the work, but maybe they're people who are managing the work that's being done and didn't expect to be exposed to the hazard at all. Sometimes the people that are exposed to the incident may be passersby, people who are working nearby on different but related jobs. Sometimes it's just general public. And then, of course, sometimes it's the people who are involved in doing the direct work. So there's a lot of different people who may be exposed to an incident, and it might not always be just the people who you might naturally think of. The other thing that we need to consider is what kind of environments do we need to rescue them from? Maybe confined spaces. There's a lot of ladders in most workplaces. Construction sites have very unique concerns and very unique hazards. Ropes courses and challenge courses are obviously a concern in a variety of different places. We know that the agriculture industry we've seen a significant amount of press in the agricultural industry in past years, and wind turbines and the clean energy is also a place where there are many hazards. And of course the old-fashioned energy transmission, power transmission situations is a very hazardous environment. Trucks, truck loading, grain situations, and again power and structures that are involved in power transmission and delivery. So there's a lot of different kinds of environments, and what kind of environment you're in and what kind of environment the people that were working on the site will determine what they may be wearing or may not be wearing in terms of a harness or fall protection, and it may determine whether rescue is readily available. Sometimes rescue at some of these sites may take quite a while just for rescuers to get there. And so how long that takes and what those people are prepared for and what advanced plans have been made will dictate to a certain degree what your response plan needs to be. Now when we consider the injury potential, we need to really consider what kinds of accidents might occur. And I'm not suggesting that we all need to be medics or EMTs or paramedics or doctors, but you know, in this day and age, anything can happen, and what can happen might range from complete catastrophe to just minor injury, and sometimes it's just a matter of the emotional side. But all of those injuries need to be planned for and prepared for in advance, and understanding what the injury potential is going to help you as a responder know how to best respond to it. If a person is just stuck, usually that's the best kind of situation. If a person is stranded, we have a little bit of time to get them out of that predicament. As long as we can keep them calm and keep them from overreacting, we can manage to mitigate the situation before further harm happens. So being stuck is a concern, but it's not a panic. Medical situations are a bigger concern, and obviously when there's a medical incident, if a fall occurs because of a medical incident, we have two things to worry about now. We have the fall, but then we have whatever it was that caused the fall in the first place. Now, a medical situation might be caused by a person themselves, such as a stroke or a heart attack or an injury of some sort, but it also might be because of hazardous chemicals or other things in the area that created the medical problem. So a greater medical capability is a requirement there. And then, of course, the one that we all think about and that first comes to mind is the fall itself. When we're wearing fall protection, we become concerned about what happens in a fall and what happens in a catch. Now, there's a lot of different philosophies about what happens in a fall, but the thing I'd like to point out right now and just kind of focus on is the difference between personal protective equipment and rescue equipment, and what it means that, what protection that means. So if you look at the girl on the left, she's pretty thoroughly outfitted. This is a rope access technician, and she is fully equipped to take care of almost anything that might potentially occur, whether it might happen to her or someone else on a work site. She's wearing a full rope access kit. She has personal protective equipment. She has some rescue gear on her there, and she's pretty well prepared. The guy in the middle, now he's wearing a helmet that is designed for work at height. This helmet has what we call a three-point suspension, and it won't come off your head in a fall. Even in a tumbling fall, this helmet will stay on your head. Now, that's not necessarily true of all construction helmets or bump caps or other types of helmets. So this is an important consideration, because a person not wearing this type of helmet is going to have a greater potential for head injury in a fall. Now, if you look at the guy on the right, he's wearing a typical fall arrest harness. A typical fall arrest harness doesn't have any frontal attachments at all, but only has a dorsal attachment. So if this person falls in his harness, he will be suspended dorsally and will have to figure out how to self-rescue. Self-rescue from that predicament, especially without any other equipment, can be a little bit of a trick. So depending on what kinds of equipment that you're wearing, it's going to impact your ability to self-rescue as well as your ability to rescue others. Again, the ability of the guy on the right to rescue another person, much less himself, is going to be much less than that of the girl on the left. The other thing I want to point out is how significant falls really are. When we take a fall, it's a pretty violent event. And the video that I'm going to show you is a video of how equipment is tested. And you'll see that when the dummy is dropped, the fall is pretty violent. Now, these are just drop tests, and this dummy is indicative of the type of dummy that we actually test the equipment with. And you'll see that it has no arms and legs or head, and in reality, you do. So that's going to change your picture just a little bit. But when the person falls, they typically fall in a head-down configuration. We typically don't jump off of something, we trip over something or tumble off of something. And as a result, when we fall in that head-down configuration, our body has to right itself around our attachment point. That's a pretty violent process. And in the fall protection world, we're allowed to use force absorbers. In fact, we're required to use force absorbers when a significant force might happen. And that force so a lot of that force is absorbed by the force absorber, which is great, but you can see the extension that occurs during the fall. So at the point where the person begins to impact their system, they actually end up several feet below where they first started being caught because of the allowance of that force absorber to catch the fall. So the fall is incredibly violent, much more violent than just stepping off of or into something, and then the distance that the person falls may also cause them to impact something else or other structures in the process of the fall. So all those things are going to have a contribution to the potential injury, as well as a contribution to how easy it's going to be for them to rescue themselves. Now in that process, we have to look at the significance of the attachment points. Again, as we mentioned earlier, the guy on the left who's dorsally attached, he's pretty well turtled. There's not a whole lot he can do. Even a very fit person who's been properly trained in self-rescue from this predicament will not find it easy to self-rescue. If you're attached sternally, as is the guy on the right, you're going to find it a lot easier to get yourself out of that situation, provided that you're awake, alert, and oriented. In an unconscious situation, you see that the guy on the left is kind of leaning forward. He's not in a position where he's going to be breathing openly or easily, whereas the guy on the right is caught in more of a laying down or seated position, and his airway is going to be a little bit more open and more ready to breathe. So either way, whether you're conscious or unconscious, being attached sternally is a much more pleasant experience than being attached dorsally. I do suggest that you try this. I suggest that whatever your harness is that you use at home, or preferably not at home, preferably you're using it at work, but whatever harness it is that you use, I suggest that you do try, not necessarily taking that big, tall, tumbling fall that we saw a moment ago, but at least hanging from your primary attachment point and just suspending yourself there for a few moments to see what it feels like, and then try to self-rescue yourself with the equipment that you normally carry. And it may actually change the equipment that you decide to normally carry, and it will certainly change your outlook on the importance of self-rescue in a workplace. I'd also like to call to your attention the potential for suspension intolerance. This guy in this picture appears to have a very ruddy complexion, but in reality he doesn't. He's just very, very bright red because he's been hanging for about a minute in this harness. Now you can see that he's just hanging dorsally. It's not, he didn't take any kind of significant fall, but a person suspended motionless for an extended period of time can experience very unpleasant medical, physiological effects as a result of that suspension. So we find that it's pretty important to get anyone who might have taken a fall or might simply be suspended motionless in a harness, it's pretty important to get them out of that predicament as soon as possible. We suggest that release from suspension in no more than 20 minutes is pretty critical. Some estimates have it as low as 12 minutes. So we've analyzed our potential hazards. Now we're going to define the self-rescue, assisted rescue, and external response protocols based on the potential hazards that we've identified. First of all, 911 is not a rescue plan. 911 is a great system that we have here in the United States, and most other countries have a similar plan that when you dial a number or a series of numbers, the municipal emergency responders are notified and they will respond as quickly as they can. However, we're finding that in the current economic conditions, thousands of firefighters across the country have been laid off, and we've actually seen that personnel shortages are happening that have caused the closures of several fire stations. We have seen incidents that have been blamed on slow responses due to the reduction in firefighters and municipal responders. So 911 is really not, has never been a rescue plan, but in this day and age, it's even less of a rescue plan than it's ever been before. The other thing that I mentioned earlier that I want you to remember is that most municipal responders respond daily to medical incidents. They respond to heart attacks. They respond to cuts and bruises and car accidents and extrications and, of course, fires. Most municipal responders do not respond frequently to people suspended in fall arrest. Therefore, not all municipal responders are adequately prepared with either equipment or training to access the areas that they might need to access in order to release someone in your workplace from suspension. So having a pre-plan is incredibly important. First, we look at the hazard analysis. We define the area of responsibility and what our foreseeable fall hazards are. So if you have people working on ladders or on catwalks or on suspended platforms of any kind, you know what those hazards are, and you know the kinds of places that they might have the potential to fall. Note, too, that it's not always just a fall. Again, there may be chemical hazards involved. Sometimes there are confined spaces or electrical hazards. So knowing what all those hazards are is the first step. And then the fall rescue plan involves developing a self-rescue, assisted rescue, and external response protocol, including methodologies for all of those incidents that have been pre-identified. And then finally, training people to that rescue plan and being sure that they have frequent opportunity to practice and retrain so that they remember what to do when the incident happens. Our response protocols for our assisted rescue capability involves reaching the person, releasing them from suspension, and then evacuating them from the site. Reaching the person is the first most important thing that we have to do. And then releasing them from suspension. Releasing a person from suspension is going to vary depending on what kind of system that they're in. There's a lot of the things on the left that self-retracting lifeline, those things are incredibly popular these days because they can help to reduce the length of a fall. The concern with those types of devices is that once you fall into them, there is no way to release them until you're able to actually let the tension off of the line. So finding a way to let tension off of that line is key. In some situations, a person may be suspended. They may be suspended in a workplace environment, or as the lady in the right, she's suspended in a ropes course environment. And depending on what the method of suspension is, releasing them from suspension can be difficult. Your response protocols need to be as simple as possible. Simplicity may include a ladder. Don't overlook the most simple and basic forms of rescue. If you have a bucket truck on site, that can be a whole lot faster and a whole lot easier and often a whole lot safer than rigging up a bunch of ropes and trying to do a suspended type rescue. If we do have to do suspended type rescue, we want first to do a non-entry retrieval. That means we want to be able to retrieve the person from their predicament without entering the vertical space. Now this might, a lot of people think of non-entry retrieval as applying to confined space, but in fact non-entry retrieval is actually also referred to by OSHA in terms of not entering the vertical space or the hazard space. And then finally, if an entry type retrieval is necessary, that's always our last resort. We don't want to do that as a first resort. We really want to do that as a last resort towards rescuing a person. This is an incident that actually occurred in June 2009, and it was a situation where everything happened the way it should. It was a roofing incident that occurred, and because of pre-planning, the fall was mitigated by a self-retracting lifeline to less than 2 feet. The person fell less than 2 feet, the self-retracting lifeline caught, and the guy was rescued by a co-worker within 5 minutes. No harm, no foul, nothing bad really happened. The person went home for the rest of the day and came back and was back on the job the next day. This is what we like to see happen. Simple, elegant solutions are usually cost-effective. They have to be cost-effective or people won't use them. They have to be site-specific. If you try to take a rescue plan that was designed for a different site and apply it to your site, you might find that anchors aren't available where you need them, equipment's not available when you need it, and the equipment doesn't necessarily work in the environment that you're in. The equipment has to be easy to use, and the instructions have to be easy to follow. Most people don't practice rescue regularly. Most people do rescue only when they need to, and they may only practice it once a year, or sadly, some people practice even less than that. So the equipment has to be so easy to implement that when it becomes necessary to use it, it's almost plug and play. We have to be able to achieve maximum success with limited training. Now, limited training is not just a matter of frequency. We like to say people should train at least once every 6 months, at an absolute minimum once every 6 months. Often people do train only once a year, and we even occasionally see people that train less than that. But there's a frequency of training that's involved, plus a type of training. The technical rescue training, the part of hooking the system up and turning the crank to get the person out of the predicament is one side of the equation, but we also need to think about the medical conditions that the person may be experiencing, as well as the psychological panic that may set in when a coworker is injured. And there's really not much we can do to train for that kind of stress. So we have to be able to achieve maximum success with limited training in all of these areas. The solutions-based approach involves both systems and training that is specific to those systems. And the idea is to solve each potential problem specifically and directly, rather than just collecting equipment and training. So whatever your work plan is and whatever your rescue plan is for that work site, don't just collect equipment and training that you think you're going to throw a bunch of carabiners and harnesses and ropes and things towards that problem. Know exactly where you're going to hook up, know exactly how you're going to release the person from suspension, and know exactly how you're going to extricate them from that predicament so that you can achieve success. So the employer shall assure the self-rescue capability of employees. The self-rescue capability might involve something like this. This is an emergency escape system, and actually there are multiple types of these systems. The one that was in the previous slide, that type of system is going to be very difficult to get out of. So knowing how to extricate yourself from that situation might involve clipping yourself to something completely different and then unclipping yourself from all the complicated things just to escape. Escape is often achieved through something simple like this. This is an emergency escape device. It's an auto-locking device, an auto-locking system. There are numerous systems out there these days that are very plug and play. All this guy has to do is pull the little handle on the left, hold some back tension with his hand on the right, and if he pulls too hard, he'll stop. If he accidentally lets go, he'll stop. But if he hits that sweet spot in the middle, he'll be able to descend to safety. Self-rescue may involve just getting yourself into a position of comfort. So in a situation where a person falls into a dorsal attachment point, self-rescue has to begin with the ability to get themselves into a frontal attachment or a position of comfort very, very quickly. They have to be able to use existing equipment to do this, and they need to be able to do it very quickly. You'll find, if you do that little experiment that I was encouraging you to do earlier, you'll find that your goal needs to be less than 5 minutes, because your ability to self-rescue quickly diminishes as your breathing is precluded by hanging in that point, and your energy is very quickly sapped. So the first step is to get yourself into a position of comfort, and then to find a way to descend if you're able to do that. Controlled rate descenders, such as the one in the picture here, is a type of device that you simply step off into the open and the device releases itself. And I'm sorry, this is supposed to be a video that doesn't seem to be working, and I apologize for that, but the controlled rate descender will actually just lower a person to safety without any intervention on the part of that person. It's intended to be a one-time use, so once this person has bailed off, some devices have the ability to use the other side of the rope for another person to bail off, but not all systems do. So these are a single function type device. They're self-actuated, and once you use it, it's kind of used until it's reset. So for a single person, this is a very good solution for almost no training at all, but it's only usable in a very limited type of environment, and it doesn't enable this person to rescue or assist anyone else. A personal escape descender that's manually operated and is carried on that person is a much better solution, because if each person has one of these, then it won't really matter what the incident is. Each person will have the ability to take care of themselves and not be dependent on a piece of group equipment. This personal escape descender is manually operated. It is auto-locking, so as I said earlier, if he pulls too hard, it pulls the little handle with his left hand. If he pulls that too hard, he will stop. If he accidentally lets go, he will stop. But if he hits that sweet spot in the middle, he can descend to safety. Assisted rescue is the next line of defense, but assisted rescue is really only possible if you have nearby personnel, usually co-workers, who have a rescue kit either on their person or, again, very nearby, and the system is easy enough to use that they're able to execute the rescue in a very short period of time. We usually target a goal of about 10 minutes for assisted rescue. In reality, it may take a little bit longer than this, but you find that in training, if a person can do this sort of thing in 10 minutes or less in a real situation, they can usually do it in less than 20 minutes. So in order to achieve effective assisted rescue, we have to reach the subject, release them from suspension, and then we need to be able to evacuate them from the site. Reaching the subject is something that requires training in the environment that the person who has injured themselves or who has fallen, you have to have experience in working in that environment. So you don't want to just send anybody into the environment. You want to send someone who's trained there. Reaching the subject is the first step towards successful rescue. We may not be able to reach the subject directly. We may have to use a device such as this reach pull in order to get them out of their system. So reaching the subject is not best necessarily done physically. Sometimes it's better to be done from a distance without getting yourself into the situation. Releasing the subject from suspension is often best done with some sort of a pulley system. There are sort of complex pulley systems like this that you can use and put together if you want to learn how to put those things together. You can do something as simple as vectoring the rope once you have a person attached to it, or there are very plug-and-play prepackaged solutions that can be used. And then evacuating the subject by lowering them to the ground is the final phase of rescue. Sometimes you can't lower them directly to the ground, and in that case, doing a lower that involves horizontal or sideways movement in addition to vertical movement will help clear obstacles or other hazards. As a last choice, we can use entry-type methods. When we're using an entry-type method, we can also reach, release, evacuate. It's always the same order. We have to reach the person, we have to release them from suspension, and then we need to get them out of their situation. You can see in the picture on the left here that this guy is using a prepackaged system. It's all pre-rigged, so this is a system that can be used either from above or from on-site or in the hazard like this person is doing. We call this a pick-off. So a person can do this from above or as a pick-off. And this is the best kind of system to use, something that has lots of versatility like this. And as I say, there's a lot of systems out there these days that you can choose from, but we prefer to steer you towards something that's multifunction. The important thing is to have compatible components. That's one of the main reasons for going to a prepackaged system, something that you know all the pieces were designed to work together and that they're not going to have great potential for rollout or incompatibility. The system should be easy to use. It should be multifunctional. You should be able to use it for multiple types of rescue. And it should be fail-safe. That ability to accidentally let go or accidentally pull too hard on the system, none of those things should cause catastrophic failure. It's a good idea for equipment that's used in industry to meet the ANSI Z359.4 standard for safety requirements for assisted rescue and self-rescue systems, subsystems, and components. This is a new standard from ANSI Z359, and it is designed specifically for co-worker rescue. A lot of people ask about the NFPA standard. NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association. Those guys do professional rescue, and they have to use equipment that meets professional rescue standards. But most people who are in that type of environment do rescue almost every day, or at least very frequently. And so having plug-and-play equipment is not necessarily quite as important for them. However, for coworker type rescue, having simplified and fail-safe equipment is incredibly important. So look for the ANSI Z359.4 mark on the equipment that you use. Consideration for your descenders, it should meet some sort of an existing standard, whether it's an ISO standard, a Euro norm, an ANSI standard, or an NFPA standard. It shouldn't just be a piece of equipment that you've made in your shop. It needs to be something that meets an existing standard. Knowing whether that piece of equipment is made for single or multi-person loads and not exceeding the load capacity of that piece of equipment. Knowing whether it's an auto-locking type device, and we do recommend for coworker rescue always using something that has a hands-free lock as well as a panic lock type system. And then a multifunction device that enables rescue by raise, rescue by lower, rescue by descent, as well as pick-off rescue. That multifunction capability will make you a much more successful rescuer. And then that multi-person load. Professional rescue is always something that you should initiate as soon as an accident happens. I mentioned earlier that 911 is not a rescue plan, but it should always be part of your rescue plan. So as soon as an incident happens, even as you begin your self-rescue, coworker rescue techniques, do activate your professional rescue, and better yet, contact them in advance and let them know what kinds of work situations that you have and what kinds of situations that they might face should they be called into your facility. Unless you do that, they may have very limited job site awareness, and they may not have the equipment or have practiced the techniques necessary to rescue from your work site. One big advantage of professional rescuers is that they have advanced capabilities, whether technical or medical, and so they can respond to more complicated type situations than coworker rescue might be able to take care of. Developing your rescue plan, as we talked about, starts with analyzing your potential hazards. Then we have to define self-rescue, assisted rescue, and external response protocols. And then finally, training and preparing our staff is the final step in that system. As we train and prepare our staff, we need to keep in mind that most people who work at height don't do rescue as their everyday job. So in addition to that initial training that we talk about preparing them with, we also have to talk about ongoing training. People for whom rescue is not an everyday job are not necessarily going to remember all of the steps without a lot of practice. So after that initial training, be sure people have an ongoing opportunity to practice. The more, the better. And then retraining should occur even if they have a chance to practice monthly. There should be a retraining event that occurs with evaluation and assessment on an annual basis to ensure that people are kept up to date with changes that may have occurred in the rescue plan or rescue systems, and then also to ensure that they really do remember what they think they remember. Documentation of training is key. Training did not occur unless you've documented it. So knowing what training has occurred and documenting that training is critical to ensuring the employee's capability when the accident happens. And finally, making sure that your documentation shows evaluation of that person's capabilities so that you can ensure that that person was at least taught and at least knows at one time what their capabilities are and how to perform a rescue will help in the event of an incident. Who do we train? Who do we train in the event if we're a workplace or if we're an employer? Anybody who works at height should be trained. Now, everybody who works at height may not be trained to exactly the same level. Everybody who works at height should be trained at the very least to a coworker or to a self-rescue capability. Self-rescue capability, as we talked about earlier, involves getting oneself into a position of comfort, relieving the potential for motionless suspension. Getting that person into a position of comfort to wait for rescue is an absolute basic, and then having that person capable of self-rescue or self-evacuating themselves if necessary. At a higher level, that coworker-assisted rescue, that may not be something that everybody knows how to do. That may only be a few people on the job site. However, it should be more than one person on the job site, because if that one person is the person who becomes incapacitated for any reason, someone else should be capable of rescuing them. So everyone who works at height should be trained to at least a basic level, and then some of the people who are on site at all times should be trained to rescue others in the event of a fall. That self-rescue capability belongs to everyone, and it should be given to anyone who ever puts a harness on for any reason, even just to climb a ladder. And again, using a suspension relief foot loop, such as the one that you see in the picture here, this happens to be a suspension relief foot loop that deploys from the fall arresters. So when that force absorber is deployed, that little system comes out, and the person can put their foot in it and get themselves into a position of comfort pretty readily. Anybody and everybody should be trained to do this. And then assisted rescue. Not everybody's going to have that capacity. Not everybody's going to have that capability. But there will be a few people on every work site, or a few people in every job, who will have the capacity and the capability and the technical prowess, if you will, to be able to be trained as assisted rescuers. Again, I would encourage you to train more than one person, so that if the person who's trained becomes incapacitated, there is someone else who has the capability. Interfacing with local resources is something that we often don't think of in terms of training, but it is key. Inviting your local rescuers to come to your work site and practice rescue and see what kinds of situations that your workers may become involved in is something that any work site can do, and every complex work site should do. We have to retrain. I can't emphasize this enough. Research suggests that when we're trained in something, we don't necessarily use it, and we will lose it. In fact, the average level of retention for a given topic is only 30%, as little as 1 month after training. So when you think about somebody who's going to rescue you, what 30% do you want them to remember, or do you want them to be trained a little more often than that? And the more simple a solution is, the more refined a solution is, the more likely it is that a person is going to be able to remember it when they need it the most. Now, I know we've only touched the high points today, and we've only talked about some overview type situations, but this should get you started in writing your rescue plan and in developing your rescue protocols and in knowing what the key components are. If anybody has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them now, or if you'd like to contact me offline, I'll be more than happy to answer questions by phone or by email as well. Again, I thank you for your time today, and Jess, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer those now.
Okay. There are a few questions, so if you would like to, if you haven't asked your questions yet, go ahead and type them into the chat/questions area of your control panel, and I'm just going to switch the screens over really quickly. Okay, you should be able to see my screen shortly. Give me just 1 second. Okay. The first question, let me get to those, is what if I am a subcontractor on a multi-employer job site? Is a rescue plan my responsibility or the responsibility of the company that hired me?
That is an excellent question, and it's a question that I will actually address in greater detail in a book about to come out in 6 months. Just kidding. Actually, I'm serious. There is a book coming out, and I do address it in the book. But it is a really complicated situation, and it's one that the rules have changed a little bit. It used to be that we used to be able to blame anything on the overall contractor, and then that kind of switched for a while, and the contractor was able to subjugate that responsibility to the subcontractor, and these days we find that everyone is responsible. In recent court cases that have addressed exactly this situation, we've found that the employer or the main contractor, if you will, has an overall responsibility for ensuring the capability of on-site rescue or rescue for the subcontractor, but they don't have to do it. They just have to ensure that the subcontractor is capable of it. The subcontractor, in turn, is not relieved from that responsibility just because the employer has a responsibility, but they are responsible for being able to perform their own rescue, or if the employer agrees to do it, that's an okay solution too. But the monkey is on everybody's back from a legal perspective, as we've seen in recent cases.
Okay. The next question is, if my company has a rescue plan and also the actual kit to perform the rescue, where should this rescue kit be stored, and how do I know it's in good condition to be used?
That's a really good question as well. Obviously, there's some people that have some practical experience listening to this, because those are the kinds of practical situations that come up in real life. The kit should be stored wherever the kit needs to be in order for the people who need it to get to it quickly. How's that for a Weasley answer? Unfortunately, there is no maximum or minimum kind of a rule. As I said earlier, the OSHA specifies and has put out some interpretations that have said we're responsible for prompt rescue. And prompt rescue means that the person needs to be removed from further potential harm before potential harm can happen. So, for example, in the case of an electrical situation, if a person may be exposed to further electrical hazard or further chemical hazard by remaining in that space for an extended period of time, that person needs to be removed more quickly than someone who has, for example, just fallen to a lower level and has a sprained ankle and just needs to get out of the predicament. So how soon you need to be able to remove the person will dictate how close your rescue equipment and your rescue personnel need to be. We're seeing this a lot with work sites like wind turbine work sites and places like that, where you may have workers working in teams of two, but the site may be like hundreds of acres large, and one or two appointed people who have been assigned the rescue people may be on the opposite corner of the wind farm when the incident happens. So how quickly can those people get to the site? And that kind of situation, it may dictate that you might need to have greater training on more of your people in order to ensure that prompt rescue. Somebody also asked, or you also asked, how do you ensure that it's in good shape when you need it? That's a really, really important thing. We recommend that you have two kits, and we don't recommend that just because we are a manufacturer. We recommend that because when you train with the kit, you take it all apart, and so your training kit should be kept separate from your actual in-use kit. So when you train with your training kit, it gets taken apart and put back together frequently, and isn't necessarily protected from being dismantled. Your in-use kit should be inspected once a year at least, and it should be opened up and taken out by a competent equipment inspector. They should look at it and ensure that it's ready for rescue, and then repack it into the bag in its ready state. And then if you can close that bag or bind that bag in a way that will show that the bag has been opened or tampered with, and so as long as the tamper-proof seal is still on the bag, then you can ensure that it's in, or reasonably ensure that it's in a ready state.
Okay. The next question is, as an employer, is it mandatory to have a group of employees trained to perform rescues?
No, it is not. As an employer, you are only required to ensure prompt rescue. So whether that rescue comes from co-workers who are trained and nearby, whether it comes from a standby rescue team that you've hired to bring on site, or whether you just happen to be fortunate enough to have your plant right next door to the local emergency response organization who happens to be trained to the type of incidents that you need them to be trained to, any of those scenarios are fine. You just have to ensure that the rescue capability exists. It's not mandated how you ensure that it exists.
Okay. That is all the questions that we have right now. If you have any others that you want to get in real quick, go ahead and type them in while I'm closing up here. If you visit the website shown on your screen, you can ask Louie further questions. There's going to be a link there to email her. And then you also will be able to download the slides and watch the live recording on that site within 24 hours. The PMI webinar series hosts webinars frequently, so keep an eye on that website for future dates and topics. And another way to get information about future dates and topics is by signing up for our e-newsletter or following us on PMI's Twitter and Facebook accounts. We put updates about all of our webinars as well as a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on all the time at PMI. So there's still no further questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And we hope that you enjoyed it. And thank you very much, Louie, for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being here.
Have a great day, everybody.